I've seen things that science can't explain. And I'm not talking about theories or books I've read. I'm talking about what I saw with my own eyes, in 27 years working as a forensic psychiatry nurse in a custodial treatment unit. 27 years caring for patients who committed serious crimes and who will never leave that place. 27 years seeing what happens when someone who has already lost everything, even freedom, even hope, gets close to death. And I need to tell you this today because what I saw completely changed the way I see life, death, and everything that exists on the other side. My name is Helena, and this is not a horror story. It's a story of hope. If you're feeling this way with me right now, stop everything, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a comment below about where you're listening from and what time it is there, because the next story will change everything forever. I started working in the psychiatric custody and treatment unit in 1998. I was 23 years old, had just graduated, and thought I could handle anything. The unit was in an old, gray building with thick bars on the windows and a smell of disinfectant mixed with mold that you never forget. Inside were men and women who had committed violent crimes during psychotic episodes, and whom the justice system had determined needed treatment, not regular prison. Many of them were going to die there. And that's exactly why I started seeing things that nobody taught me in college. The first time was with a patient named Marcos. He was 52 years old, and had spent almost 30 years there because of a crime he committed during a severe schizophrenic episode. Marcos was quiet, polite, and in recent years had become very ill. Terminal lung cancer. We knew he wouldn't last much longer. It was a Thursday afternoon, October 4, 2001, and I remember because there was a coffee stain on my white uniform, right here on the left side, that didn't come out even after washing it 3 times. It was 4:20 p.m. when I went into his room to change his 4. Marcos was lying down, very thin, his skin almost transparent, and he looked at me with those deep eyes and said, "Nurse Helena, my mother is here." I looked at the corner of the room he was pointing to. There was no one there. I smiled with that patience one learns to have and said, "Marcos, your mother passed away a long time ago, remember?" He shook his head slowly and said, "I know she died. But she's here. She's there, in a blue dress, just like the one she wore when I was a child. She's smiling at me." His voice was calm, there was no fear, no confusion. It was the voice of someone seeing something real. I stood there, holding the 4 bag, and felt a shiver run down my neck. Marcos continued, "She's saying everything's okay, that I don't need to be afraid. She said that when the time comes, she'll come get me." He smiled. A real smile, you know. A smile I hadn't seen on him in years. And then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and I swear I felt the room get warmer, as if someone had lit an invisible fireplace. I finished changing the 4 drip and left with my heart pounding. I went straight to talk to Dr. Carla, the psychiatrist in charge. I told her everything. She looked at me over her glasses and said, "Helena, it's common. Terminally ill patients have hallucinations. Lack of oxygen to the brain, medication, the brain trying to process death." I accepted the explanation, but something inside me didn't fully accept it. 3 days later, on Sunday morning, at 6:42, I know because I looked at the round wall clock that had a line through the number 7, Marcos died. I was at the nursing station when the assistant came running to get me. I went into the room, and he was there, with his eyes closed, with that same smile. And guys, I swear to you, the room was different. I can't explain it properly, but there was a peace in there, a quietness that wasn't normal. The assistant who was with me, Sonia, she looked at me and said softly, "Did you feel it?" I nodded. She didn't need to explain. We felt the same thing. I kept thinking about it for weeks. I read some articles about near-death experiences, about visions on the deathbed. I discovered that there are studies, like those by Dr. Raymond Moody, that talk about how terminally ill patients often report seeing deceased loved ones in their final moments. But it still seemed distant, theoretical. Until it happened again. This time it was with a patient named Vera. She was 63 years old and had killed her husband during a psychotic episode caused by untreated bipolar disorder. Vera was a small woman with gray hair always tied in a low bun, and she had severe diabetes that had progressed to kidney failure. We were giving her hemodialysis 3 times a week, but her body couldn't take it anymore. It was April 2003, an autumn day with that weak sun coming through the barred windows. I entered her room on a Tuesday afternoon, at 2:15, because there was a red digital clock on the bedside table that showed the exact time. Vera was awake, but very weak, and when she saw me she gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Helena," she said, her voice hoarse but firm, "my father is here. And my sister too." I looked around. Empty room, just her and me. "Where, Vera?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She pointed to the foot of the bed. "There. There. My father is wearing that brown suit he was buried in. He looks younger, Helena. He has the face he had when I was a girl. And Sylvia, my sister, she's beautiful, she doesn't have those marks from the accident anymore." Sylvia had died in a car accident 20 years earlier, and I knew this because Vera herself had told me months before. She continued, "They're saying it's time to go. That there's no pain there. That I'll stay with them." And then, my goodness, she looked at me with those tear-filled brown eyes and said, "I'm afraid of going to hell, Helena. I killed my husband. I killed him. How am I going to go to heaven?" I felt my chest tighten. I held her hand tighter and said, "Vera, you were sick. You didn't know what you were doing. And if your father and sister are here to get you, it's because you're not going to hell. It's because you're going back home." She started to cry, but it wasn't a cry of despair. It was a cry of relief. She repeated softly, "Going home. Going home." And I saw it with my own eyes, her face relax, the tension leave her body, as if someone had lifted a weight off her. She lay there, breathing slowly, looking at the foot of the bed, and I don't know how much time passed. It could have been 5 minutes, it could have been 20. But when she finally closed her eyes, I felt that she wasn't alone. Vera died the following morning, at 3:12. I wasn't on duty, but the nurse who was called me to tell me. She said, "Helena, it was fine." She was smiling. And you know what's even stranger? Her room smelled of flowers. Roses, I think. But there weren't any flowers there. I didn't know what to say. But I knew it wasn't a coincidence. After Vera, I started paying more attention. I began asking terminally ill patients what they were seeing, what they were feeling. And, wow, I discovered that this happened to almost all of them. It didn't matter what crime they had committed, it didn't matter if they were considered dangerous or not. When death approached, someone came to get them. Always. And it was almost always people they had loved who had already passed away. I read more about it. I discovered the work of Dr. Pim van Lommel, a Dutch cardiologist who studied hundreds of cases of near-death experiences. I found out that there is something called terminal lucidity, when patients with advanced dementia or serious brain diseases become completely lucid and conscious in the hours or days before they die, as if the brain were switching back on for a moment before shutting down forever. And I saw it happen too. A patient named Roberto, who had severe paranoid schizophrenia and who for the past 5 years had been incoherent, suddenly woke up completely lucid 2 days before dying of pneumonia. He called me by name, asked how I was, and thanked me for taking care of him. And then he said, "They're waiting for me, Helena. My grandmother, my Uncle João. They're right there at the door, waiting. But I'm not ready yet. I need to apologize first." He asked us to call his family, his sister whom he hadn't seen in 15 years. We called, she came, and he apologized to her, cried, hugged her, and she cried too. 2 days later he died peacefully. I started to notice a pattern. It didn't matter how much the person had suffered in life, how much they had made others suffer. When death came, what came with it wasn't judgment, it wasn't punishment. It was love. It was acceptance. It was light. And that completely changed the way I saw those patients. I began to see in them not the crimes they had committed, but the people they had been before the illness, and the people they still were underneath it all. But I still had no idea what was to come. The second story I need to tell happened in 2006, with a patient named Julio. Julio was a rare case. He had been an extremely brilliant university professor of physics, but had developed a severe delusional disorder in his 40s and had committed a violent crime during one episode. He was 61 years old when I started treating him, and he had rapidly spreading pancreatic cancer. Julio was different from the other patients. He was a staunch atheist, a skeptic, and constantly said that he didn't believe in anything beyond what science could prove. I remember perfectly the first time he mentioned something strange. It was a Monday morning, 9:30, and I went into his room to administer his pain medication. His room was at the end of the hall. It had a small window overlooking the inner courtyard, and the winter sun streamed in weakly, making everything look somewhat gray. Julio was sitting on the bed, his back supported by 3 stacked white pillows, and he looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. Confusion. He said, "Helena, I need to tell you something, but you're going to think I'm completely losing my mind." I sat in the blue plastic chair next to the bed and said, "Julio, I've worked here for 8 years. Nothing scares me anymore." He gave a short, humorless laugh and said, "I saw my brother last night. He was here, in this room." I knew his brother, Carlos, had died of a heart attack 3 years earlier. Julio continued, "He was at the foot of the bed, wearing that red and black plaid shirt he loved. He didn't say anything, just stood there, looking at me, and then smiled and disappeared." Helena, I know it sounds like a hallucination. I know. But it wasn't. I was conscious, I wasn't dreaming, and I saw him. I saw him. I asked carefully, "And how did you feel when you saw it?" He thought for a moment and said, "I felt relieved. As if he had come to tell me that everything is all right." But that doesn't make sense, Helena. There is no life after death. There is no soul, there is no heaven, there is none of that. It's all chemistry in the brain, it's the brain dying and creating images to comfort me. I know that. But his voice was wavering, as if he wasn't so sure anymore. I said, "Julio, what if it isn't? What if it is real?" He shook his head, but I could see he was thinking. In the following days, the visits continued. He saw his brother almost every night. Sometimes he saw his mother, who had died when he was a teenager. And he began to change. Julio, the skeptic, the scientist, began to ask questions. "Helena, have you seen this happen with other patients? Do they see dead people too?" I said yes, that I saw it all the time. He was quiet for a long time and then said, "So it's not just me. It's not just my head." One night, 2 weeks after that first conversation, I was on duty, and Julio called me on the intercom at 2:37 in the morning. I know the time because I looked at the wristwatch my father had given me for my graduation, a silver watch with Roman numerals. I ran to his room, thinking he was feeling unwell. But when I went in, he was sitting on the bed, and, my goodness, his face was different. It was illuminated. I don't know where the light was coming from, but it looked like someone was pointing a flashlight at him. I looked at the ceiling, to the sides, there was nothing. He looked at me and said, his voice trembling with emotion, "They're all here, Helena. My brother, my mother, my father, my best friend from college who died in an accident. They're all here, and they're telling me that I don't need to be afraid." I approached the bed, and I swear to you, I felt something. It was as if the air in the room had become denser, more charged. As if there were people there, even though I couldn't see them. Julio continued, "They're saying there's light on the other side. That it's beautiful. That it's like coming home after a very long trip. And you know what's even stranger, Helena? I believe it. I, who have spent my whole life saying that none of this exists, I believe it." He began to cry, and it wasn't a cry of fear. It was a cry of gratitude. I held his hand, and it was warm, even though he was so sick. I said, Julio, there's nothing wrong with changing your mind. And there's nothing wrong with believing. He squeezed my hand and said, I spent so much time trying to prove that life was meaningless. That everything ended when we died. But I was wrong, Helena. I was wrong. And then he looked to the corner of the room again and said, as if he were answering someone I couldn't see, I know. I know. I'm ready. Just a little more. Julio lived for 5 more days. In those 5 days, he changed completely. He asked to speak with the family of the victim of the crime he had committed. He apologized, cried, and said he regretted it every day. The family didn't come, but he wrote a letter that we promised to deliver. He wrote letters to everyone he loved, asking for forgiveness for being absent, for being proud, for not showing love. And every night, he saw the people who had come to get him, and every night he felt more at peace. Last night, I was on duty again. It was 3 in the morning on a Saturday, and I went into his room because his heart monitor was beeping. He was conscious, but very weak. I approached him, and he looked me in the eyes and said, "Thank you, Helena. For not thinking I was crazy. For believing in me." I said, "I always believed in you, Julio." He smiled and said, "They're here now. It's time. I'm going with them." I asked, "Are you scared?" He said, "No. I'm happy. I'm finally going home." And then, guys, something happened that I'll never forget. The heart monitor started to slow down, and Julio slowly closed his eyes. And at the exact moment the monitor emitted that long, continuous straight line sound, I saw a light. I saw it. It wasn't a light from the room, it wasn't a reflection of anything. It was a warm, golden light that appeared in the corner of the room where Julio always looked, and then disappeared. It lasted less than a second, but I saw it. And I wasn't alone. The nursing technician who was with me, Rita, looked at me with wide eyes and said, "Did you see that?" I said, "I saw it." We stood there, still, in silence, and I felt such a great peace that I couldn't even cry. After that, I knew it wasn't just my imagination, it wasn't just my desire to believe. It was real. It was real, and it happened to everyone, even those who didn't believe. And that made me think, if death comes to claim even the skeptics, even those who deny everything, then maybe it has nothing to do with faith. Maybe it's simply the truth. But I still couldn't imagine what was to come. The third story I need to tell is about a patient named Beatriz. Beatriz was a 72-year-old woman, very religious, who had developed a severe psychotic disorder in her later years and had attacked her own daughter during an episode. She was admitted to our unit by court order, but she was docile, spent her days praying the rosary, and had an enormous devotion to Our Lady. Beatriz had advanced Alzheimer's, and in the last 2 years she no longer recognized anyone, spoke incoherently, and spent her time staring into space. But that changed in the last days of her life. It was August 2009, and Beatriz had developed severe pneumonia that wasn't responding to antibiotics. We knew she was going to die soon. One Thursday afternoon, around 5:30, I went into her room to change her diaper and adjust her pillow. She was lying there, her eyes open, but as always, unfocused, expressionless. I started working, talking to her softly as I always did, even knowing she probably didn't understand. And then, suddenly, she turned her head and looked me in the eyes. I stopped immediately. Because that look was conscious. It was lucid. It was as if the old Beatriz had returned. She said, in a weak but clear voice, "Helena." I almost dropped the sheet I was holding. It had been 2 years since she'd spoken my name. I said, "Beatriz? Do you recognize me?" She smiled, a small but genuine smile, and said, "I do. I know who you are. You take care of me." I sat on the edge of the bed, my heart racing, and said, "Yes, I do. How are you feeling?" She looked at the ceiling and said, "They're here. The angels. They came to get me." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "The angels?" I asked. She nodded slowly and said, yes. And Our Lady too. She's over there, in the corner. She's more beautiful than in the pictures. Much more. I looked to the corner of the room. I didn't see anything. But Beatrice kept looking, with an expression of pure adoration on her face. She's wearing a blue cloak, like in the paintings, but the light coming from her is golden. It's so strong I can hardly look. And she's smiling at me, Helena. She's smiling. Tears began to stream down her face, but it wasn't a sad cry. It was a cry of pure joy. I held her hand, and she squeezed it back with surprising strength for someone so weak. Beatrice then said, she's saying that I'm forgiven. That everything I did was because of the illness, and that God understands. That my daughter is okay, and that one day she will forgive me too. I started crying along with her, because I knew how much she had suffered with the guilt of what she had done. And now, there, at the end of her life, she was receiving the forgiveness she so desperately needed. She continued describing what she saw. She spoke of angels, saying they were pure light, that they didn't have wings like in paintings, but that they radiated love in a way she had never felt before. She said she could hear music, but it wasn't normal music, it was sounds coming from within her, as if her own soul were singing. And then she looked at me and said, Helena, don't be afraid of death. Because the other side is beautiful. It's like waking up from a nightmare and realizing you're home, safe, loved. It's like returning to your mother's lap when you're a child. I stayed with her until my shift ended at 7 o'clock in the evening. When I left, she was still conscious, still seeing visions, still at peace. The next day, when I returned to my shift, the nurse from the previous shift told me that Beatrice had remained conscious all night. That she had talked to the nursing assistants, had asked to pray with them, and had spoken non-stop about Our Lady and the angels. And that at 4:15 in the morning, she had said, it's time. They're calling me. And then she had closed her eyes and passed away. What impressed me, and what impresses many researchers like Dr. Bruce Grayson, who has studied near-death experiences for decades, is that Beatrice had advanced Alzheimer's. Her brain was completely deteriorated. She couldn't form memories, she couldn't recognize people, she hadn't been able to speak coherently for years. And suddenly, in the last 24 hours of her life, she became completely lucid again. That shouldn't be possible. Scientifically, it doesn't make sense. Her brain didn't have the functional structures necessary for consciousness, for memory, for language. And yet, she came back. This is what doctors call terminal lucidity. And it happens in cases of Alzheimer's, brain tumors, and severe encephalitis. People who have spent years unable to speak or recognize anyone suddenly become completely lucid in the days or hours before they die. And science still doesn't know how to explain it. Some say it's a final surge of neurotransmitters, a last effort by the brain before shutting down. But I don't believe that. Because if it were just chemistry, why do they all say the same thing? Why do they all see light, love, loved ones waiting? Why does everyone say they're going home? I believe, and this is just my opinion, that the brain is not the origin of consciousness. The brain is the receiver, like a radio that picks up waves. And when the brain is dying, when it can no longer filter, consciousness is freed and finally manages to see what has always been there. And that's why Beatrice, even with her brain destroyed, was able to see. Because what she saw didn't come from the brain. It came from a place that Alzheimer's can't touch. After Beatrice, I started seeing terminal lucidity happen more frequently, or maybe I just started paying more attention. I saw patients with severe dementia, with severe brain injuries, with stroke sequelae, all returning to full consciousness in their final moments. And they all reported the same thing: light, love, loved ones waiting, the feeling of coming home. And I thought, if this happens to everyone, regardless of religion, belief, or brain state, then this can't be an illusion. This has to be real. But nothing prepared me for what I myself was going to experience. The fourth story involves something I had never seen before, and it left me speechless for days. It was 2011, early December, and we had a group of 6 patients in the unit, all of whom were very ill. 2 had terminal cancer, 1 had advanced heart failure, 1 had end-stage liver cirrhosis, and 2 had severe respiratory complications. They all knew they didn't have much time left. And on a Monday night, December 5th, at 2:20 in the morning, something happened that challenged everything I thought I knew about death. I was on duty with 2 other nursing technicians, Luciana and Fernanda. The intensive care unit had 6 individual rooms, all on the same corridor, and that night was quiet. Each of the critically ill patients was in their own room, and we made rounds every hour to check their vital signs and see if they needed anything. At 2:20, I was at the nursing station, filling out reports, when all the monitors for all 6 patients started beeping at the same time. Yes, at the same time. Not one after the other, not seconds apart. Simultaneously. We ran to the hallway, divided the rooms, and started checking. None of them were in cardiac arrest. Their vital signs had fluctuated, but they were all stable. What caught our attention was something else. All 6, without exception, were awake, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, with the same expression of astonishment. I went into the first room, Mr. Antonio's, a 68-year-old man with liver cancer. He looked at me, his eyes wide and full of tears, and he said, Did you see her?" I asked, "Who did I see, Mr. Antonio?" He pointed to the ceiling and said, "The girl of light. She passed by here, went through the wall, and went over there." He was pointing towards the next room. I was confused, tried to calm him down, and ran to the next room. Luciana was already there, with Dona Marissa, a 75-year-old lady with heart failure. Marissa was sitting on the bed, pointing to the ceiling, saying, I saw her. A girl all of light passed by here. She didn't touch the ground, she floated. And she had the most beautiful face I've ever seen in my life. My blood ran cold. I rushed to the other rooms. In the third room, the patient, Osvaldo, 59 years old, with cirrhosis, was crying and repeating, "It was an angel. It was an angel. He came here."